Hello. Hang on. Okay, can you guys hear me? Oh,
Yes.
excellent. Okay. I'm in town. I got stuck in town today, and the Wi-Fi is bad, and my phone has little battery. So let's see how it lasts. But so, Mark, this is what the capital looks like. You should come up sometime.
I think I know where you're near Victoria, aren't you?
Bang on. Bang on. Right. So, excellent. Hello, Bob. Hello, James.
Oh,
Would you prefer Jim or
Good
James?
morning. Jim is better.
Jim is better. Okay. That's fine.
very quickly, I may have to duck out. I've got a guy coming to do an estimate for me, but hopefully won't arrive until after the call.
Did you see by any chance the post that I did about the meetings? Actually, I'll just show you real quick.
No, but I did see the papers Bob sent, which were interesting. So
Yeah, we should definitely go through that. So here we have the journal. This is just, hi Fabian.
Hello.
I just wanted to show you this briefly. So this document has 216,000 words in it. And it is, hang on, just closing windows here. That's not what I meant to do, sorry. Right. It has our monthly speakers, human transcribed, and then it has these three meetings just computer transcribed. So the point is that as we go through here, and I think it's a bit overloaded, but if I do select Peter, for instance, and do Command F, these are all the times Peter has been speaking, which is actually a bit interesting because if you're looking for something Peter said in the last session, it'll probably show up here. So the fact that it works, I think it's a bit crazy. Look how quick it is. And again, that's 216,000 words. What I have designed, and I wonder what you think, is this really simple thing here of when you do the find, having in the lower, hang on, sorry. Imagine here in the lower left-hand corner, it has an option, and the lower right-hand corner has an option. One of them will be copy search results. That's what Mark wanted, makes a lot of sense. And the other one would be find in find. So that would mean, you see here they are implemented. You click on that and then you type in a search. And now you can see here, after having searched for choice in brackets, also find this term. So that's where we're beginning to get some sort of use of our record. The problem is going through ideas that we've talked about, including on Friday, where we have links to where something was spoken. I don't think we would hardly ever follow a link to check if someone said what is written down. It's good to have it as a backup, but not for every single thing. So I'm wondering if anybody has any comments on really basic record keeping of meetings, since it's a popular topic.
I'm not sure what you're asking there.
What I'm asking, hi Brandel. What I'm asking is saying, especially, okay, so last Friday in our call, Brandel talked about something of that I found really interesting. He talked about when you play a computer game, the system takes care of the rules. Rather than a board game, we have to remember the rules and stuff. That is an example of something that I would like to find again in the future. And it's an example of something that I want to cite. So the question is, what kind of workflow can we have where that utterance that he made is available for me in the future. Because the notion of just having our entire record online, partly well and partly badly transcribed, doesn't have that much utility. It probably comes down to a specific thing, because what Mark and I've been doing for the journal, of course, is a bit of editorializing, molding and formatting and all of that stuff. Editorializing will probably stay crucial. So for instance, in a meeting like now, if someone says something interesting, it would be really nice to have a way to mark that down in a human form, just even if it's misspelt or whatever it is, but to have that somehow connected to the record should be wanted. So I'm just wondering about the actual feeling in the community for how we may do that, or if we even should consider doing that. Mark?
So which way do you want
Yep.
that link to go? I mean, one of the things I noticed, I mean, certainly one of the reasons I was putting backlinks to the video into the transcripts was just that it varies from things to thing, but basically when auto translation goes wrong, it goes badly wrong because it uses vocabulary lookup. It just produces a gibberish of valid words rather than badly spelt real speech, which is probably what a human would do. Occasionally, there was one recently where I found it actually did an awful lot of basically rewriting, having to retranscribe it. So, you know, such is life. That's not a complaint. That's state of the art. So the links to certainly what I've been did for what it's worth, what I've been doing when I've been reviewing stuff has been to try and basically put each exchange with a link. So when it's a new question, let's say in a Q&A position, a new speaker comes in, and then they might have a couple of turns with either them or other speakers or the visiting speaker, and that's probably enough crosscut. Another interesting thing is the degree to which it's worth making links. Occasionally people will mention a number of products or ideas or papers that are worth linking to. The problem we face with the split between sort of digital use and paper use is, well, if you print the thing out on paper or you read it as if it's digital paper, you can't see the target of a hyperlink. But if you put the hyperlink visibly on the screen, then it's really eye-searingly awful to read because your eye keeps tripping over all this garbage you don't need because you just click the thing. And I don't think there's a happy medium for them both. But that's just a little thought from the experience of doing some of the, you know, tidying of transcriptions.
You know, the question is effort versus reward, obviously, because it does, you know, even to tag, hi Peter, even to tag the names in the group, the Sonics does a great job with a few names, and then they'll get one or two wrong, and you just have to spend at least 20 minutes just assigning. And it just, if it's really useful, I don't mind doing it. But the question is it useful for us? I mean, Fabienne and Brendel, even though I use Author, as you know, inside Author, there is all kinds of JSON and stuff. So if at some point we wanted to use our record, we can expand it a bit and look at it in different ways. But anyway, that's that. Happy to continue or not on that topic. But Fabienne, yes. Oh, sorry, Bob. Yes, Bob.
Well, the meetings that I find most useful in this group are when we have a theme and we more or less stick to the theme. When it's just a general open discussion group, which anybody changes the subject frequently because they want to say something that's on their mind about their topic, are fairly unsatisfying to me, at least. And they may be very extremely helpful to all the rest of you. I would prefer to have occasional theme-like meetings like we had the other day on connections. And I made I was inspired enough by the actual having of those to start to collect the notes that I would make if I were beginning to make a mural about connections. And I sent it to 2 or 3 people who I had their emails for. and I have received nothing back from that. No comment on that. So no, I'm not. It's not a critic. It's not a criticism. It's just a description, please. And
It would-
all right, if you want to say something, go ahead.
It would probably be good to have more themed meetings. I think as a general feeling that would make sense, right? So maybe because the question of connections is obviously central to all of this. What do you all think if we take the next few Fridays and try to keep it on connections? Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Because yeah, okay, that's a good yes. Thumbs up and shaking head. That's wonderful. Because Bob, the thing that's interesting as well is, you know, I'm so grateful for this community, and I think you guys are as well, since we're here. You know, we all have no reason to be here other than wanting to be here. But also, it can quickly become overloaded. So if we keep our interactions primarily during these hours, because getting an email, because I appreciated the email and I appreciate what you showed, but you know, think about it and then discuss it when we're together. You know what I mean? So let's continue with your chart on Friday, and have Friday be our next information relationship meeting. Is that cool with everyone?
Sounds good.
So what I understand is that the theme will continue to be connections.
Yeah, connections and
Friday.
relationships. Yeah, connections, relationships, in
Okay.
practical terms, philosophical terms. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a big one. By the way, talking of connections, my internet connection is really, really bad. It turned out the Wi-Fi here doesn't work, and you can see there's not a lot of battery left. That's my dad, by the way, and my brother. Looks like Edgar now, but anyway. Fabienne, you haven't been here for a while, but you said you may have something interesting to talk about, so please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I have a couple of things, but let's say the one that's a failure, so maybe it's interesting because it might have suggestions, was that when we had the presentation by you 3 weeks ago, maybe, on soft space in VR, at some point I suggested could be interesting potentially to have a window back to the world, or to whatever he's organizing in VR to make it a bit more permanent. So I've done that basically for the way I organize some things in VR. So I did not plan on showing it from within VR, but I'll see if I can do that. It makes it a bit more pragmatic. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see that.
Thank you. And
Like shit.
what? Okay. Must have changed something. Well, then I'll show you on the camera then. But basically, so that's the same thing I just showed you, except
Oh,
that,
you're remarkable.
yeah, on the remarkable, and there is the way to, that's a little bit counterintuitive, let's say, but the idea was I want a realistic point of view. Like if I put the window here, then I need to see there, so that it's the same point of view when I use the VR headset, you know, I'm sitting on my desk. Because the idea is like you have the virtual world is real, that I'm sitting here when I used it. So I have memory, let's say, of the shape of the room, but also when I'm outside of VR, like chatting with you or working, doing all my stuff. So what I had to do was to put a mirror in the VR space, like let's say 2 meters away, more or less, through the wall, one would say, and then put a little, it's very hard to see, but the little rectangle there, so that it looks as if I was peeking through that window, which is the shape more or less, or the ratio of the remarkable. So yeah, I'm saying it's a failure in the sense that technically it works, but what I was hoping for is that it would prompt some either memory or some desire to go back in VR to organize stuff more, and basically didn't. It was I had it on my desk for a couple of days or a week or something like this. I guess in a way it comforted me to say, oh, that virtual space is there and I can go back whenever I wanted. But maybe you can see on the very top, I guess, there is a little bit of text, but it's definitely not readable. So yeah, that's a bit, that was the attempt of keeping, let's say, a permanent connection with the virtual world. And so far, yeah, was not as nice as I thought. One of the hypotheses on why not might be that there was not like big visible changes. Maybe if there was like a big visible change between moment A and moment B, let's say 1 or 2 days after, I was like, okay, now I see progress, but as is, that did not happen.
Okay.
While processing that and thinking about VR and spaces, is there an appetite in the group to, along the lines of the spaces, the real world spaces you're talking about, to try to think of how we can have a record of our own meetings in VR? We kind of go in and out of it. And the reason this is something. The reason is Bob is very good at narrowing things down and asking questions like which kind of text, which kind of documents, which I think is very useful. So now I'm wondering, the kind of environment you're talking about, Javier, should we try to figure out how to have our record? We have over a year's worth of recordings. If we start donkeying around with them, is that useful?
Sure.
I think, I mean, the challenge is, what are the anchors, the handles that can pull you into them, and how do you sort of determine, how can you identify the value at a low kind of reflexive level? Because simply seeing everybody's celebrity Squarespaces doesn't really tell you much about what it is they are. And you know, you get that sense also if you ever see these or other people's transcripts on YouTube of conversations like this. They all look the same. They don't have any of the actual affordances that are indicative of what it is that you would get if you would go through them. And so that's just a challenge with the disparity between the format having this really, really consistent visual form and the informational content not being sort of adequately accessible at this stage from those things. And one of the things with a window is that it's something that you have to see at a glance. And so you need to have ways of being able to communicate the values at a glance. You know, Remarkable is a certain kind of format. You know, e-ink has certain benefits and downsides. It's very high contrast. It's moderately high contrast. It's very high definition, so that you would be able to convey a lot of stuff. Something that my wife encouraged me to dig out recently again. As I'm sort of crawling out from the fugue of my last abusive employment relationship, is playing with this projector and thinking about what it is. And so I haven't done as much actually useful work in terms of extracting it, but thinking about having the ability to just put something up on a wall. It's pretty bad contrast here, but I'll turn the light off. Of being able to put things that are a little bit more animated and sort of reflective of some kind of dynamic process, and I think that would be valuable. But for our chats, back to what you were saying, Frode, is you need to figure out something to represent them in this at a glance way, in order to make sure that it's something that you can retrieve the value from. Without sort of investing in it, because otherwise you have to study it, you know, and then you have to be taking a leap of faith based on the sort of availability of those things, which people can, but it's difficult and more fraught to rely on, because it means that you need people to have the expectation that they'll get something out of it. Anyway, that was my projector, and that was fun to play with.
Yeah, that's really interesting and cool. Fabian's use of real world spaces is really fascinating, because I could imagine, at least those of you who are here quite consistently, you have in a VR space, you are in a specific place, like on Zoom, windows move about all over the place. But if I assign, Fabian is always to my left, etc., it may help when I'm trying to get through the discourse. So if you combine some sort of a time view with the location of a person view, maybe even a geography view, I think it can become very, very interesting. Fabian?
So in terms of, if I understood correctly, going around the different VR solutions rather than just chatting over Zoom, it's not exactly the same, but last week there was a meeting in Paris for WebXR. Sadly, it was a bit too short notice for me, so I couldn't make it. So instead, what they did is they put my face on a big TV, and they kept a laptop in front so that I could communicate with people there. Honestly, actually, it worked pretty well, but it worked pretty well for like the round table. Like everybody did a little introduction for 5-10 minutes, couple of interactions. But then when they started to break in, let's say, small groups or one-on-one, I just waved goodbye and wished everybody a lovely time. But for this, face-to-face clearly is better. So I think, let's say, hopping from platform to platform, being ours or existing ones with the headset or not, I think works when it's constrained enough, and let's say help others that might still be curious by the content not to just give up. So it could be, let's say, having a virtual camera in VR. It's tricky but feasible. So this way we can still have a bridge between people who might not have the ability to, and might still have quality suggestion. So that was, but it has to be structured, let's say. If it's like a brawl, then everybody's disappointed, basically.
Of handles, but once there is a record, what are the kind of points we will use to move around in that space? So having a bit of a constraint or rules or a format for how to have a conversation definitely helps. Peter?
Yeah, I just dropped a couple of links to projects generating simulations of books into the side chat. The first one's a Blender add-on. The second one was an attempt to just use CSS and a little JavaScript to create a randomized looking bookcase for a bunch of book titles that existed as HTML elements. And the last one is another Blender-based project. I think the problem I see with them is that they're basically picking random dimensions for the books as opposed to actually getting the real dimensions of the books, which I think would be very important to have in anything that we did. Because what you'd want to have is a image of the spine of the book, the back cover, the front cover, plus you'd want to know the actual physical dimensions of the book in order to get an accurate representation of them. One of the neat things in the Blender projects is the idea of them automatically being able to position the book so it looks like some of them are leaning at slight angles against one another. So that's a very nice touch for adding some verisimilitude to the simulated bookshelves.
Yeah, I mean, physicality definitely is important. Mark?
I was just wondering in terms of representation in the space, in terms of the talks, how it sort of discombines in the sense you might go to, there might be a place to go to for a meeting, then within that space, effectively, then you're entering a nested space that might contain information about the people who were there, and each of the people there might contain further information. So there's a sort of there's a sort of Russian doll effect, and I don't know to what extent we're but what level we're talking. Are we talking about the representation of, you know, this talk as opposed to this Friday's talk, or are we talking about the contents of a talk, or both? I asked that without any, there's no sort of hidden agenda to the question. I was just sort of trying to get a context there. And one other thing I just throw in passing, listening to things and watching sort of Brandel's showings, you know, projecting something, that I'm reminded that still the fastest way I can access my musical records, I've got about 950 albums essentially in my digital music collection, is by album art. Even if I just want one track, it beats any other thing. Even if it's not the cover I know is on the record or the tape or whatever else I originally had. Once it's in there, that thing, whether it's static or I mean, I don't know that the moving necessarily adds anything to the recognition. It might add to the engagement. So I'm not dismissing that aspect of it, but I'm just reflecting on the fact of how much more powerful the visual sort of avatar is than any other search mechanism.
Just to throw in kind of a repetition that is obvious, but I think it's worth reflecting on. There's a huge difference between editorialized and non-editorialized record. The reason I'm highlighting it is we need some sort of a straight everything that we can then go through later. But it's going to be very rarely useful. It's going to be mostly when we, you know, like that example of Brandel's talking about the game thing on Friday. That's enough for me to remember to go back. But what will be really, really interesting is how we use stuff. You know, how do we cite? Because how often do we want to have the audio? Probably not often. How do you cite in VR? You know, do we want to cite when we finally all have headsets, how we're sitting in that room when we said it? Or is it only the audio, or is it only the text? You know, these can be very interesting kind of memory palace things related both to the kind of album art and so on. But I'm just wondering, because I would characterize this discussion as how information connects within the specific area of our record. So I'm sure you guys have.
Are you proposing that today that's what the topic is? I can't, you know, I couldn't, you know, you were a little fuzzy, at least from my standpoint.
Yeah, I am being very fuzzy. I think that on Friday, definitely connections and information and linking. But today, yes, I'm throwing that out there that maybe that is what we talk about. But I'm also very happy if we go in different routes. I think we should have at least one day a week relatively loose. But I'm just going to leave that open, hand over to Peter, and then see where we go and where you guys want to take it. Peter.
Okay. I think we should be having a distinction between what we're citing. So I could be citing my viewpoint as opposed to citing the entire environment. And it's a question of how much data you're going to wind up having to save and how little we can get away with saving. I don't mind having something where it might be computationally expensive to reconstruct the environment if you wanted to. I was watching Shark Week. They had one project where they had a whole bunch of cameras and they got enough video so that they were able to synthesize perspectives from different angles on the shark feeding frenzy after the fact. So they were able to recreate the three-dimensional space of the sharks moving around in 3D and position a virtual camera within that space at arbitrary locations. Now, that perspective that they were showing during the documentary was never captured explicitly at the time. They merely captured all the data and then synthesized the camera viewpoint later on. So having that kind of capability would be invaluable, but then other times I simply want to cite the thing that I'm looking at the moment, in which case the system could just sort of like track my line of sight from the midpoint of my eyeballs out to the first object it hits, and then just save that particular object. So then you just be like getting a 2D capture of something you're looking at. If I'm looking at a surface, or a capture of a specific model, if my viewpoint is focused on a model in 3 space, as opposed to capturing the entire environment. And I'd want to be able to explicitly say, I'm citing the environment that I'm in, so you'd be able to move around in it after the fact, or an object that I'm looking at.
It's interesting to hear you use the term citing the environment. What I would probably do, what I probably will, is take a picture of you guys on the screen where I am, because I'm in a different location than I usually am. So for me, it has some meaning. So yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it, of where we are. Yeah, Mark?
Sorry, I'm muted now. It's just a thought. It's interesting you mentioned the thing of taking a picture, because of course, one thing I can guarantee is that the arrangement on your screen will not be the same as mine. And just flopping back to the power of the visual, you know, the thing that you remember is quite persistent. Again, so if you show me the wrong picture with the people in the wrong order, it will not have the same recall effect, even if it's all the same, you know, the same elements in a different grid. Will not work the same. So that's an interesting thing in terms of fidelity. Now, in something like Zoom, that probably could be resolved by locking us all into little boxes, though we might not like that for all sorts of other reasons, because it appears to privilege some over others, etc. But nonetheless, it's just another interesting sort of angle of this.
Yeah, but it also brings up the physicality of the space. For instance, I will remember this conversation differently because of where I am physically now than, you know, some of the other conversations. And also something I really wanted to mention many times, I keep forgetting, is my friend Björn, some of you will have met, super intelligent Norwegian guy, yes, they do exist. He was talking on and on about the importance of oxygen when doing mental work.
What?
Can you say
What?
oxygen, fresh air?
Oh,
And I felt that was a bit odd, but he is so completely right. When you're doing heavy lifting mentally, yes, you need water, you probably need coffee. But what does the brain use? It uses oxygen. Most offices are not optimized to really feed in lots of fresh air. So I've noticed with myself, when I'm sitting outside, like I'm doing now, my brain works a lot better. And with VR, part of the problem is it uses light for orientation. So if you're outside, it's too much light and it loses its orientation. So I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts on that, because obviously that relates to AR. If I'm sitting here and having an AR augmented meeting with you guys, I get the benefit of the oxygen, but then there are the detriments of the technical environment. Do you agree with that difference, by the way, of having sufficient
that
fresh
doesn't
air
interest
actually
me in the
helping?
slightest.
I think it's very noisy. Let's say capturing the environment. You have so much you need to capture, and I would say most of the time is really not interesting. But the thing is, we don't know in advance if that's going to be interesting. And storage is cheaper, always getting cheaper. So because in the end, like here, we need to record, ideally we record everything all the time. And then we go back eventually in the future. It's like, okay, most of it was not interesting. Some of it was interesting. I don't know what triggered it, because ideally we want to see the source or eventually spark new ideas related to that, or even check if it's true or not. But I think it's tricky in terms of, let's say, a compression problem or an archival problem, because yeah, it's not just recording text, but everything all at once, all together, all the time.
I'm surprised to hear you saying that's not, they both disappear.
Yeah,
Did
he
say-
he might have disconnected. He might have rage quit.
Okay, so I said air is interesting, and he said that's not interesting. They disappeared. Okay, fair enough. I'll keep it back.
Air really is important though, because a few times I've done a Zoom without any air blowing on me. I can't think as clearly as when I have a little fan off to the side, sending a gentle air current over me.
Yeah, it's funny, and it's, you know, even though we're talking about technology and communication, the actual, yeah, there you go, Mark. The actual spaces that our bodies inhabit, they do have requirements that don't necessarily go together with those. But in terms of this type of dialogue, Would it be fun if we imagine that it's a year in the future? We are actually the ones in charge. And one of the aspects of Apple's VR headset is Brandel. I love using Apple as an example, you know. And we don't show the recording of the meeting, but here we are on stage, Macworld, huge thing, not Macworld, worldwide developer. It's like, wow, imagine going into the room, and this is the finesse and elegance through which we can find what someone said 6 months ago and how we can use it. Isn't that like a fun and animating way of thinking about specificness? Or do we have different ideas of fun?
No, that sounds like it would be a really lovely thing to aspire to. It's to, I mean, so I think, like I was saying about the YouTube videos and the transcripts, what's missing is the handles. What's missing is a representation of what was significant about the specific activities and performances. In the context of a YouTube video, if it would remain, like, even if we were to use some kind of mythical, you know, if Apple were to make something like that device, and if the record was still a YouTube video, then we would still be at a loss as to what the appropriate handles are. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is the way that our little video windows can actually stand in for what it is that we are or what's important about us. And you know, one interesting thing about that is the ability to augment it. I don't know if you've seen people put up extra stuff in the way that sort of people who do video game streaming or other sort of basically sort of webcam based performance in a gaming context rather than other ones. But they have often you know, visual information behind them or around them, and they can apply skin. So Snapchat, for example, there's a Mac app and a Windows app that allows you to apply snap lenses, so that if you want to look like a dog in your Zoom meetings, then you can, that kind of thing. But more seriously, that allows you to augment aspects of not just sort of your background, but also maybe views of yourself with things that can then be, you know, chosen to be representative of something. So if you literally want to have hats on that you wear in the same way that people talk about wearing different hats in business or computing, then you can do that. And it's crass and it's ham-fisted, but it's a very, very clear visual reference and representation of the specific things that are going on at that specific time, and it means that it's seekable. And if you don't like that, then you can encode that in text that's sort of big and visible, and you can yeah. Exactly, Peter. And whatever meaning you ascribe to those things, you know, you have the opportunity to set the standard, or you can defer to those standards as they emerge. So it'd be really interesting to think about how, because this format, you know, these recorded Zoom conversations are something that the pandemic kicked off, but I think that the formal benefit, the benefits that flow from the form are enough that they'll endure even as people have the ability to meet face to face, because it means that we can meet from London and Brussels and San Francisco. Yeah, I think that finding ways of performing meaning and having ways of those becoming more sort of retrievable are pretty interesting. I would say things like SnapCam, as well as MMHMM. It's an app available at mmhmm.app. Are very interesting insofar as they allow people to be able to kind of yield up aspects of their visual representation. So you can put slides in your background. I like that because it's kind of like weather presenters being able to point to stuff. You know, one of the things I've always thought would be interesting is having the ability to look at points, or to have things like your Memoji sort of address different things on a slide in order to be able to kind of refer to them, as well as making use of actual expressive Memoji in the context of text messages. But anyway, yeah, like so having those handles, having those references, and finding apt ways of being able to generate them on the other side. That's the other aspect of it, is that and SnapCam don't have. Snap does have good ways of generating, but not to necessarily ascribe meaning to them. It's just about capturing eyeballs for advertising at this point. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
You mentioned something along these lines before, and the way I'm interpreting it now is tap back for video almost. You know, for those of you who may not remember the word, when you have a message on an iPhone, you can tap on it and you can choose to thumbs up, thumbs down, heart, whatever. It's called tap back. And I think it's one of the greatest contributions to the written language in the last decade or two. It's amazing. I'm wondering if we think of what you said, Brent, in terms of, so I saw Mark was saying it's editorializing, and it absolutely is, because it is that person's, oh, this is interesting, this is boring, whatever. How could we actually do that? Let's say we decided this is the most important thing. How would we build it? Would we build it on FaceTime? Would we build it on Zoom? Would it be an additional client? Would it be a plugin? How could we possibly do that?
I would say we build it with sticky notes first. I mean, you got to think about what it is that it is and what it is that it means before you can start architecting and engineering. Basically, build fake things, show them to people, and see what they say. Is what the prototyping groups at Apple recommend to everybody in public and private. And so to that end, coming up with a representation of it. So something that you could do is, you know, you prototype with sticky notes, whatever, and then you go through and, if necessary, essentially, like B is good. The Kabuki mask also pretty excellent. So one thing that you could do is, you know, perform it and pretend that you did, essentially. So if you actually have everybody on green screens or whatever, then you'd have the ability to go in after the fact and make it in, you know, Final Cut or After Effects or whatever. Once you have specific ideas about the way that you can imbue sort of certain meaning. So somebody might have just their transcript up here, or their particular word cloud based on mediation from, you know, term frequency and versus document frequency, so that we don't have the up here, but we do have TF-IDF, because that's a sufficiently infrequent term that it's indicative that it's meaningful and relevant. So yeah, you figure out what are the dimensions that appear to be relevant, come up with ways of representing them, but do so in the cheapest way possible. And then if necessary to demonstrate it to other people, then you fake it in the cheapest way possible in order to make it seem to somebody else as though it's really happening, and then evaluate what you're on the hook for with regard to real engineering effort later. How I do it if I was in charge of prototyping somewhere.
We could even start with just this one. And all that means is this person considers this bit right now interesting. So when the video gets processed, it winds back maybe 10 seconds before that. There's a special kind of a tag transcript for that. That could be one of the handles. And then, of course, if several people have hearts up, that may mean something different than if just one person has it. That in itself, I mean, it's very rare we do thumbs down, tap back, because it's really kind of rude unless someone is going through something bad. I'm having a tough day at work. Then you do this. But heart, you don't. Heart. If Emily asks me, should we have Chinese for dinner? And I want to say no, I would never do that. You know what I mean? So having too many symbols isn't necessarily useful. What do you guys think of experimenting with that part?
You can certainly experiment. I think another interesting thing that comes out of that is, of course, you know, we're all on different devices at the moment. For some people, that might be touching something immediately. Hi, Emily, on the screen, or somebody, it might be drilling through several levels of menu. And I'm not recording that fact by way of a problem, other than thinking that the ease of doing it. So in other words, and rather following on from Randall's point about you want to start with something really simple. So in other words, you almost need to you need to find the easiest way of recording, sort of in a sense, the symbol that you can then embellish at a later point. So almost the first thing is to figure out there are two separate things: how easily you are able to record that reaction quickly so that actually it occurs in the right place in the stream. That's probably more pressing than whether it turns out to be a hand or a face or a heart or something. Not that that's not important, but if you get a reaction that's occurring even, say, 15, 20 seconds out from the point, then the entire relevance of marking these passages is like to suffer. And I'm not saying that's not fixable. I just think that's probably reflecting sort of state of the art kind of thing at the moment.
I'm listening.
Did you get away with the thumbs down for Chinese dinner?
Yeah, we don't get to make dinners anymore. It's Zina. We have Ukrainian food almost every night, which is very, very strange and not at all bad. But yeah, back to the hearts.
Well, as long as you like potato dumplings, I'm a fan.
Yeah, potato dumplings and a lot of borscht. But the thing is, I've stopped eating
Yes.
chicken unless I have a choice. I like birds, so this dead bird thing baffles me. And there's got to be pork and bird in every single dish, so that can be a bit trying on my patience. But other than that, yeah, it's good. There was a thread that I think I shared on Twitter, excuse me, with the group on Ukraine, which had also a lot of issues to do with information. I don't have Twitter up and running there, but there are some information things we can learn there. But okay, so let's say that we start doing hearts and we start processing the videos for hearts and find an easy way to put that into the transcripts. How do we then have this amazing experience of finding stuff later?
Well, one interesting thing that comes out of that is if you have these markers, I mean, to a certain extent, how they're visibly manifested is one thing, but even just having the markers potentially allows you to do a similar sort of collapse that you were showing at the outset with your author documents. So you might have 2 hours of video transcripts, but the ability to collapse it down to a set of markers that, you know, these are in effect the key entry points. I can see all sorts of sort of shimming to be done around that, but even just the notion of saying, being able to say, right, within this 2 hours there are 5 things, for sake of argument, that if you wanted to quickly get in amongst the meat of that meeting, that those are places you might want to jump in. And of course, those can be embellished with further metadata or something in due course. I mean, because in effect, they become a sort of metadata anchor for further metadata.
It's going through the conclusion bit of the expert interview section, which is written formulaically as what I've learned in terms of research question number 2, utility is so and so, and then in brackets, the person who said something to support that, their quotes in quote marks and brackets, and so on. That's a convention that I've adopted to do this. I think it's relevant to this because the question is, once we found stuff, how will we use it? We'll probably use it as a citation somewhere. You know, it'll be really interesting at some point to be able to go back and write a year in review of our group as a case study. And there will be a lot of quotes. So then the question becomes, how should the quotes refer back to the record? You know, a little icon, the citation mark, how would that work? And also, should it refer back to the long thread transcription, or should it be to the video, or what environment should it be? But that's where it gets kind of interesting, right? Yeah, Peter?
It might also be interesting to do something with the transcripts, say having a concordance of terms that appeared in each session's transcript, and then maybe try to do a clustering of the concordances so that we could see where topics reoccurred and do some sort of a visualization based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the kind of stuff we need to play with. There are so many things. And Mark
That could really work
Anderson's
in 3D too.
Yeah, absolutely. At Mark's insistence, I'm reading the You're a Thing and I Love You book, which is kind of interesting to get a basic ML AI thing. And I am absolutely convinced, just like we're underutilizing VR, we're underutilizing the techniques that we have available there. Brenda.
I think it's a boring observation, but a necessary one to make is that, you know, with regard to citations, it's important to consider the intent or the purpose, the function of the citation, what it is that you intend to do, what people would actually do with them. You know, if people follow citations within the context of an academic paper, then, you know, having handles adequate to being able to actually get those as maybe quickly as possible. So having hyperlinks that aren't so much about identifying, well, that they need to do two things. One is that they need to clearly disambiguate and identify the specific reference so that you have some ability to anticipate what it is, but then the mechanical direct ability to actually retrieve it as a consequence. And, you know, that's what a link is on both sides. It's you know, identifying what it is and providing that the ability to traverse through some kind of network from this one to that. And that's why when people say click here, it sucks, because what the hell does here mean? And why we have the idea of link hygiene. And so in that context, if you're talking about a conversation here, then providing adequate context for what that is. But that also goes to, like, does anybody intend to follow them? You know, because if citations inside an academic context aren't especially meant to be followed, then that's not that important, that you're simply citing it and you're just boosting the citation count. So you know, being a little bit more upfront, hopefully, than modern academia about what the intention and what the actual direct expected use of those kinds of references are, dictates the form and what people need to understand about it. And so whatever is necessary as adequate to identify the period being kind of referenced and cited, and then whatever is helpful for people to in actually making that traversal. So it might be like copy to clipboard, you know, like having the ability to actually load that up in case somebody wants to be able to do that. Yeah, it comes down to what in practice do people want to be able to do as a consequence of responding to that signal.
Yes, absolutely. Mark, I see your hand just really quickly. But this obviously also relates to addressability, you know, because we can't link to something if we can't address it. So that just pops its head up. Anyway, yeah, that's an exciting issue. Mark?
Yeah, I'm thinking. So I was thinking, as Brandon was speaking about the thing about, you know, the intention of linking, and of course, he said with heavy irony, you only ever cite something because it's important. I mean, that's one of the really annoyances, that we're not allowed a free hand to say, look, this is stuff that is relevant, but seriously, you know, I didn't read it, and you probably aren't either, but you should know it's pertinent. But you're not allowed to do that. The rules do not allow that sort of behavior, sadly. I didn't say that, of course, for the recording. My thought was that if you have richer citational sort of metadata, also there's more of an opportunity to think not just about the addressability, but also the affordance you're offering the reader. I'm reflecting on this, having been tracing some references this morning, and it was painful. Basically, it got me roughly in the right area, but there's nothing usable. And you know, that is very common, sadly, in citation at the moment. Now, partly it's an issue of addressability, because people think that as long as I've proved that it exists, my job is done. I would beg to differ if you care for the reader, but I fear most people don't when it comes to citation. So something that could be improved there, and going back to the point of what does it link to the say the video transcript, does it link to the text transcript? The answer is it could link to either or both. And it's perhaps, you know, we shouldn't be over prescriptive as to whether we send people to one or the other. We may indeed want to offer them the choice, because if I'm partially cited, the video doesn't help me much more perhaps than the written transcript being read to me. Because it might be read more slowly and I'm not having to listen to the conversation crosscuts and things. So there are all sorts of extra affordances come out of this. So in other words, we can begin to think in a more structured terms about what we're trying to do when we send someone or we refer them to a certain place.
Brother has a hand up, but he also said he had to step away for a minute. So, I mean, We can sit in contemplative silence. Oh, and in terms of specific advancements and innovations, it's technical, so it probably only interests Fabian, but I managed to get a proper stereoscopic portal working in WebXR without having to refer to a deferred rendering system. So I'll send you an example of it, but basically taking the ability to use planes to do culling, to do clipping planes. If you use the 3JS's on before render and then align 4 planes with each of the eyes, then you have the ability to have cutouts. And I find that very interesting and useful because it means that you have a much more powerful ability to constrain the sort of location of elements within a scene such that you can simulate monitors and other portals and things like that. So again, down in the weeds, but interesting in terms of the practical opportunities that flow from it. So that means, one cool thing about virtual, in more lay terms, one of the benefits of virtual reality is you can place things anywhere. But one of the downsides of that is that sometimes you want to have a large object, for example, say an Apple Watch, for just argument's sake, if you work at Apple and you sell them, and you want to be able to look at a subset of it. And you don't want to have, so you want to look at the crown, but if you were to look at the crown, because it's actually quite a small thing, then it means that the device would be several meters wide, and so you want to be able to crop it and clip it, but there aren't particularly graceful ways to do that. And so having the ability to do that and basically apply those kind of crop selections arbitrarily is a pretty powerful kind of go-to capability and technique. And I came up with one that's a lot cheaper than most of the other systems and approaches. I haven't turned it into a library yet, but it's the sort of thing that I might actually be reasonably positioned to apply to do in my new capacity. So it's very exciting, but even without that public official contribution, I can give it to Fabian without anybody firing me for it. So
Interesting. Sorry, I had to step away for a second. But also, Brandel, your VR view of the JSON file from the map in Author, is there any chance we can push it back a little bit? I would absolutely love to demo it, but it's so.
Oh yeah,
weird when
sorry,
you're
I thought I had
inside it.
already done that. I'll take a look at it again. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Mark?
I just wanted to mention passing a note because I don't know if people saw it. Bob kindly sent round a couple of PDFs. One I thought was quite interesting, which was the one about effectively being able to do visualization, data visualization, 3D. My heart sank when I realized that this is a plugin for Unity, which of course will mean that 99.9% of people in the room will have no ability to use this. But even worse in terms of how much backfill we have to do is the fact that, once again, it's nice that people are using the Leyland's grammar of graphics, which is super. But one thing all these things miss is they don't think about the information. They tell you how they say you can make something that looks like this, but they don't tell you. It's a bit like a Lego structure. You're going to need 2 blocks this side. You're going to need a set of wheels, and in data terms, it's sad because the people who do all this really clever and it's impressive work that's being done. But the one thing they always leave on the floor and forget to address is the fact that it is basically useless to nearly everybody unless you explain how it's used. So if you want to make one of these pictures, here's a bit of fare, because where most people start say, I've got this information, here's some spreadsheet somebody sent me. I want to make it look like this funky picture I've seen. I think I have the right stuff. So, do you actually have the right stuff? And is it in a form that's usable? And that's seen as somebody else's job. And I think that's a real tragic failure. When we come to visualization, that's something else that I think we can put our shoulder to, because actually starting, I think, with the information you have or ought to get is a much better place to say, look at this selection of sexy pictures, choose the one you want, and now now waste your day trying to make your stuff look like that. It's always an exercise in misery.
Yeah, I would say that Paris that you described, Mark, applies. I mean, nothing is really the case in 3D and VR at this point, because it's such a nascent field in terms of people even imagining it. So it was interesting to see that paper that you cited, that preprint. I haven't finished it yet, but it's one of the, I think maybe main author is Maxime Cordil, the guy whose stuff I like. But yeah, there's that sort of non-overlap between people who are good at and like visualization and people who need to use it for real purposes, and it's pretty dire. I would be curious as to the level of conviction and effort people go to need to be at in order to even resort to using some of the default graphs in Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or Numbers by Apple, because it's also just as good, I'm sure. Where are we with those things? Because that nobody did them at all before Playfair, and Nightingale a while later, but not many people did them even by the 1960s, and that's kind of what looked like it. Like I said, like how much does anybody use any of these things, however basic, like even bar graphs and things like that, outside of their A-level like statistics and graphing kind of requirements, and what changes that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of frustrating. It's one thing to have a tool and a technique, but another one is how do you actually get the right data in there? And of course, Microsoft Excel, the way you can do some pasting and stuff, but you still need the basic literacy to know which chart to use. And my great personal passion is that I wish I could invent the next kind of charts. Maybe we'll do together in a VR environment, make a data chart that has to be 3D or maybe even 4D to make sense, but it'll help greatly with people understanding what's going on.
Yeah, because reflecting on Bernard's point, I mean, it's odd. I'm now going to sort of jump to a slightly different context, but something again, my experience of the 15, 16-year-old years of supporting the sort of tinderbox community, where although they're not using visualization, that they are in a sense in using these sort of hypertextual type spatial hypertext maps, if you want. But I see that same thirst. They know they can describe the thing they want. They just don't know how to make it. And one of the main reasons they don't know how to make it is because they are given, there's basically the start and end point is, here's the whole damn toolbox, go sort it out yourself. And that's not helpful. And I along the way being as unhelpful as and it's something I'm trying to redress in some of the writing and development stuff I'm doing. But I think there's an open door for somebody to come at this whole area from a different perspective, which effectively almost starts with the information data, call it what you will. In other words, you don't worry about, you come to whether you're using Unity or Numbers or Excel or something later, because before you even get to that point, you sort of need to know that whether you're embarking on a quest that you have no hope of getting to the end of, or you have something, but there's a little bit of work you need to do first, which will make the whole thing massively easier. But that layer just isn't addressed. It's a somebody else's job that falls between disciplines. And the sort of, I suppose the conceit is, well, you just go out and hire somebody if you don't know how to do it. But again, that disadvantages a vast number of people who have really interesting insights, but don't have deep pockets. And so if we want to make things more addressable and more usable by more people, we need to make it easier for the wider audience to really take these wonderful tools that people are building and make them stand up and dance without expecting them to be a sort of some form of rocket scientist in the middle phase. And that's not in any way to disrespect the work that, for instance, that is done in prototyping thing. I mean, but I think that's a separate thing. Prototyping is something quite, in a sense, quite deliberate. You have to use some of these techniques that are further down the line are coming from.
On data. So we won't have to worry too much about the formatting. It'll be you and me, Mark, worrying about that aspect. But yeah, absolutely an important point. One of the first things I did with Hyperwords, which later became Liquid when it was a plugin for servers, was we did some tests for the economists where you could select basically any number or lots of stuff, and it would give you a little bar. And that was all nice, like a glossary. But the key thing was, if it's time-based, you should add a little reveal triangle that gave you access to lots of other predefined data that you could fit over. So you could always have two lines intersecting so you could see relationships, which seemed to be a useful thing. I could imagine we can go a lot further, and that some data will be messy, but some of it will be available, even along our own timeline. But since we're talking about record and stuff, but what is the thing? Let's say we go through this every once in a while, and just for fun, let's say we did decide to build something together, and I'm not seriously suggesting it, just as a rhetorical thing. And we invested time, effort, money over a year. What's the sort of specifically VR thing you guys would like to put your headset on and be in?
The virtual library with realistic representations of all the books that all of us own in a shared space.
You're already in there, Peter,
Yeah.
but fair enough.
I mean, I could, if you've seen my book stuff, Peter, my WebGL book generator has the ability to create an openable, interactable thing of anything for which an API exists, in the same way that, like, I should get it working with archive.org so that I can build like Bob's mapping hypertext as well as the Project Gutenberg text. But like I do agree, but it's not so much that it's the form in the Platonic sense of a library isn't something that actually tells me as much as it might perhaps tell other people. And so the sentiment is the same, though. What I want is, I was thinking about this in the context of, my wife and I were talking about whether to get, I might have mentioned already, subscription to The Economist or Wall Street Journal or whatever. And those paper artifacts, and I don't want to get a paper artifact because I don't want to be responsible for the waste. And the fact that they don't simply disappear when I don't want them anymore is kind of a stressor for me. I don't like generating stuff that I need to throw out. But the electronic subscription isn't adequate to me for what it means that I want to do with it at this point. It doesn't tell me enough about the multiplicity of information sources and the impact it's likely to have on what I'm going to think about and things like that. So I want a library. I want a reference of the things that are around about, and a reminder of some of the cool stuff that I've done, and so that how clever I feel like I am sometimes. So having an immersive environment that allows me to think about the tacks that I can take, the lines that I can go down at any given time, and for those forms to be as easy as and encouraging as opening Twitter or something else would be nice. And if it needs to happen with a headset on, then so be it. But in general, yeah, something that reminds me of the directions that I can take, and the directions that I have taken, and what kind of fruit that's yielded.
Also, I had another author-inspired thought, and that would be if my software could really track the provenance of content across multiple cut-paste interactions over time. So for instance, I have fragments of code that wind up pasted into my current project that are actually 4 projects old. And it would be very nice if each time I pasted something in from a previous project, it remembered where it came from, so I could trace that piece of code back and then get to the context that was originally written in. So when you paste something, you wouldn't just be getting the immediate reference of where it came from, but you'd be getting its entire provenance back to the point that it was first typed in initially.
Saying Brandel, before we get, you were talking about the,
And for other provenance.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now.
I was just going to say, Brandel, when it comes to The Economist, if you think more about what you would want from it to have more use, please do tell me. One of my good friends is the deputy editor. He's a super smart guy and he's very interested in things like this. So maybe we could even have a discussion on, at least theoretically, The Economist VR edition.
Yeah, good to know. Thank you.
Mark?
I think if there was something that I would like, it would be a redundant system. It would not be something that I had to rely on. But say, for instance, if I had a link vacuum cleaner of sorts, anything that I saved across Twitter, across my emails, whatever I've given access to, I know it can pop up into this sandbox in VR that I can go into at the end of the day at my leisure if I'm not too exhausted and start to move things around and associate in a free form, fun way. Things like, you know, a video about an ant colony where with using molten aluminum to make a tomb of the shape of the ant colony. Well, that triggers some weird metaphors in my head that I want to apply to some things. And I don't want to deeply explore. I just want to flesh out those associations over the course of the days and the weeks. So having a kind of like stellar cartography of internal metaphors and associations that I could just tinker with would be a lot of fun.
So I'll turn my microphone on. To answer Fred's question, and this is going to be something probably very different to everybody else, but I mean the thing I want is, and this won't surprise you if you see my tinker around with Node. What I want is an information playing space. So it's the level beneath a lot of the sort of memory palaces we've talked about. It's sort of having basically an open map, for want of a better word, where I can take things represented however I want, whether they're, you know, a picture or just an abstract shape or something, and play with the relationships between them, where where the linkage is not necessarily visible or overt. Because what I'm trying to explore is almost the dark matter of relationships. There are all these things that I know have some, you know, they fit together, but what I want to, I don't want to look about the known bits. I want to look at the unknown bits. You know, why are these bits close together but seem to have no link? That kind of thing. I find really, really interesting aspect that I think VR offers us, but it's probably a bit niche, and I'll stop there.
Fully agree with that.
I did a dialogue with Mark. I took the glossary thing in Author and mocked up having the ability to color code by categories, so like people, location, time, etc. Absolutely useless. Okay, let's say that 7 colors is roughly what a human eye can distinguish between without having to have them next to each other. And I tested on my own pieces. There were so few words that fit any of those categories for it to be useful. I mean, I'm sure it could be to some extent, but necessarily adding visual, even though I'm a visual person and we all, I think, agree that visualization helps, to something like that, when it's conceptual, it's too many different kinds of concepts.
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of things there. One is what, Mark's observation about the uselessness of keywords in most contexts, especially when there isn't a well-trodden taxonomy that people are expecting. The reality that most keywords it wasn't Kai, it was hypertext papers, right,
Yeah.
are barely reused. So it's not necessarily a an indictment of the colors as keywords aspect of it. But the other thing about it is that, absent a specific application context, then it's always going to be an absolute crapshoot as whether a specific visualization is going to be able to support it. The reality is, and this is something that I feel like Michael Nielsen does a good job of talking about, and Andy Matuszek, is that a lot of media is a hedge. It's a guess about a breadth and a range of applications and contexts and uses, and that's why we end up with the redundancy that's present in books. That's why we end up with a sort of a balance of those things, because we don't have enough of a particular of a point of view and certainty about what the application domain is, what the specific thing that a specific person is going to be able to do with it. So ahead of time, it's hard, and that's where view specs or whatever the appropriate sort of term of succession is for that is the flexibility of that view to be able to kind of put it in at the moment that you need it. One of the challenges with that is that it means that it's going to be difficult for an author to do that rather than a reader who has a more specific goal with a text. And it also, comes at the expense potentially of the persistence of a given visualization or representation of something, because it means that if you're like, you can rearrange this however you want, then it means that you can't remember as viscerally and as concretely the specific arrangement of it, because that's subject to change. I personally think that that's something that we can find a way through if we become ourselves familiar with the impact of certain visualization or visualizing tools. But yeah, it's a challenge because of the way that it sort of interrupts the prime placement of spatial persistence that our lizard brain has for that particular characteristic. Hopefully that made sense.
It made a huge amount of sense. First of all, Peter, please write what the links are. Otherwise, in the record, they're literally not that useful. So Brandel, I could imagine take a take on that. You have the JSON thing from the map and author, and you give it one of those weighted things so it's a proper shape, which for some reason my programmer Jacob doesn't know how to do, which is weird. Anyway, let's imagine you have that, right? And I open I'm really stressed about this document, but I have my concepts in my VR headset. But that is my view of my concept. But behind it, but literally in 3D, I have the record of our dialogue, right? So then I can see, connections with that. And then I can, depending on how I choose to represent you guys, because that'll also be my view through whatever thing. But what I'm saying is you are so right that we need something to hold on to, a handle, that we also need them to be flexible. And those two things are in opposition. So how do we provide stable tools that can give flexible views? That's kind of our issue, right? So this goes back almost to the physicality of the room. Like I could imagine my main project is in front of me in a square room, whatever, that's my thing. But on the right, I got a timeline for interaction with you guys and the other things I'm doing. On the left, my concept. How then I bring these things together is interesting, because my naive perspective was that, oh, that's easy. You make a 3D shape in the middle of the room. The 3D shapes are really effing annoying if they're not done right at the right scale and at the right distance. When you stand too close to something, it becomes really obnoxious. And these are really interesting things to learn. I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on having these sets of knowledge for yourself and how you can then choose to see them together.
Frode,
Yes, please, Jim.
I've been thinking about this for a long while, and not being a programmer, kind of not being able to build anything. But what I've envisioned as one trained as an architect originally, I've envisioned subject matter as a room, and other subjects I'm interested in as other rooms, not unlike the memory palace idea. So that's one reason I got very interested in Bob Horn's graphics, because I imagined horn-like info murals on 4 different walls of a particular room, and then I could go to an adjacent room for a different topic or discussion with a group like this. And it then became very important to zoom backwards to see these multiple rooms or multiple ideas and how they might relate one to another. That's kind of one point. You know, people were talking about spreadsheets earlier on. That's really my archaic expertise. I was once 20 and 30 years ago a spreadsheet wizard. And one of the things I learned, I think, is especially important for the discussion, which is spreadsheets summarized an infinite amount of small numbers data that nobody can understand. And I first became a believer in that what is important should look important graphically. That was conclusion number 1. Conclusion number 2 was nobody's going to understand these spreadsheets unless I start to summarize them in color graphics. And not just color graphics that are bar charts of for real estate income and cash flows, but but graphics which summarize both sensitivity analysis and whole scenario analysis by changing groups of assumptions at once. So the spreadsheet itself is much less important than the derivative conclusions that are oriented to summaries for most people to digest. Anyway, that's different thoughts. The rooms as location of ideas, and then the spreadsheet separately. Pardon me for combining the two.
But yeah, that makes so much sense. How you combine specialist rooms for specialist work or meetings or views with kind of a command center room, which is your base room where you can access these things. And will be very interesting to explore. And I also wonder, I think you said how you combine them will be phenomenally interesting. And at some point, where you're probably going to leave the literal room for more metaphorical rooms, I imagine Brandel and Fabian have much more actual experience of what that might mean. But it'll be very, very interesting to see how we can go in that direction, literally open up the space for thought.
Yeah, Jim, if you haven't seen some of the information mural stuff that Fabian and I have done with Bob's work, one of the things and other things, and being able to arbitrarily fold them. So being able to take a full-size thing, the 20 feet long, and be able to pinch from any given part of it to be able to fold it together. It's a timeline which has often causes and effects that are separated by time, and I find that the manipulation, the initial sort of premise and appeal of those large information murals is the scale, the ability to be able to kind of take a step back and look and have such an organic level of detail ability. Like you were saying, spreadsheets are important, but they're visible only from a certain distance. You have some ability to make things look more important by rendering them in different ways with bolding and color and whatnot. But it's still very much a single scale kind of device, a medium, in contrast to the mural. So having those, which Bob already did, is really valuable. But then having sort of the ability to interact with and intervene on it is really appealing. And another thing that Fabian did with Mark's help was to be able to start actually extracting more of the information off of it, to be able to overlay it in the same place. So the NIREX mural has a number of dates in it, and we were able to, I didn't do it, we're able to take those dates so that they were off of the panel, as well as on the panel. But it meant that if you were looking for a specific number, then you had the ability to just look for it as it existed. So we have some modest sort of intrusions into some of the opportunities there, but yeah, very interested in where else your experiences as an architect and as a spreadsheet whiz have taken you.
Any comments back, Jim?
Not really. What I'll probably do is talk to Bob and, get his view and then try to look at that work specifically, which I think he had alluded to, as I recall.
Mhm.
I need to do some homework.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to send some links your way.
It was a shame actually we took the Narex thing happens to be so damn large, because one of the interesting things of deconstructing the information is, of course, it does that thing that I know very well from trying to make actual timelines with a real scale, is that time doesn't look good done as a normal scale. It's all bunched. You get these peaks and troughs, and if you try and put it on a sort of an equal time scale, as it were, all the way along, it always looks rubbish. That's almost your racing certainly to start with. But one of the things I did find is that I found myself thinking as I was trying to deconstruct the information, is the one thing, of course, I didn't have was an anchor back to the original PDF. And I was thinking, if I was making this now, and I don't know what tools Bob used, and of course we're talking about 2005, I think it was when he did it, and things have moved on. But one of the things, if I was making something like that now, I would want to make sure that every box, every label had effectively a marker as to where it lived. And the question is, well, what scale do you use? But in other words, that would be the link allowing you to jump in and out of the picture. So whether you wanted to go off and explore that label and maybe the document that label refers to, or you wanted to have a different view spec of the data, but you wanted the represented elements to understand where they came from in the underlying thing. The missing bit that I wasn't able to do because I haven't figured out how. I mean, I've got all the bits in the Tinderbox document. I just need to figure out the worst case that would involve me going through, I don't know how many hundred things, probably in the PDF at actual scale, and building a bounding box, a top left and a height and width, and my heart dies at the thought of that. I mean, it would be lovely if it's done, and maybe the answer might be to start with a smaller diagram, because like all these things, although I'm just playing around with data as opposed to the visualization, it's still prototyping of a form, because unless we get a suitable bit of data to play with, who's to know whether it works or not? So I might have a go at that.
It would be very interesting to see your data on the Hypertext conference, Mark, because I desperately want our community here to do more documents, even if they're small, because it solves so many issues. You know who wrote it, all the citation stuff. So the murals are fantastic and heavily editorialized, but they're also editorialized by one party, one person, or one group. When you have documents referring to each other, like we have in Hypertext, you get an interesting and different plurality. And I'm guessing I'm done.